Right. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Small Talk. Well, joining me today is author Sandie Martins Toner. So welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Nancy.
And I just found out today that you've written 3 books.
Correct, yes. So we just launched the third book, Beyond the Crossroads, in November of last year. But the first 2 books were actually written probably about 11 years ago.
Oh, okay. So let's start with the first one and we can show it to the audience if you don't mind. So that's the first one.
The Last 6 Minutes. And I wrote The Last 6 Minutes probably about 2 years after my son Matthew was murdered, July of 2005. He was murdered. We actually just celebrated his 19th year anniversary, and that was yesterday. So being on your show today is even more so important for me. So thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Well, for sure. But what inspired you to write the book?
Well, I never actually anticipated writing a book. When after I lost Matthew, journaling was something that really helped me cope with a lot of what was going on around me. I felt like I had my world had been turned upside down. You know,
Yes.
one minute your son is telling you he's going to go watch the fireworks, and then the next thing you know, you're being called by, his friend and the police to let you know that he's been rushed to hospital, that he had been walking alone and was just randomly and violently assaulted and robbed, and they ended up beating him to death. So
oh my gosh,
he succumbed to the injuries the following day, so July 2nd.
right.
And so my way of coping and trying to understand what was happening around me was by journaling. And shortly thereafter, my husband David and I decided that we were going to found an organization in his memory, as well as to help other families who had been touched by this type of violent act.
Right.
And we called that organization FACT, Families Against Crime and Trauma. And so I had been asked to sit on quite a few panels, criminal justice panels, different types of documentaries. And I was lucky enough to meet an amazing retired provincial court judge. His name was Wallace Galeby Craig. And we were away in Seattle at a crime panelist. And he handed me this old tattered novel. And all he said to me was, "Sandie, you need to finish this." I didn't quite understand what that meant at the time. But I think after going back to the hotel room, I read the book. It was called The Victims of Justice, or The Orphans of Justice. And it was written by a retired police officer whose daughter had been murdered in Alberta. And he died, unfortunately, never knowing who had taken his daughter's life.
Right. Yeah.
And so it wasn't until I finished that book that I was like, okay, I understand what he's trying to tell me. It wasn't just about writing the book or reading that book. It was about finishing that story and sharing our story and sharing Matthew's story with the people out there.
Right. Now, speaking about the perpetrator, was Matthew's perpetrator found?
Yes, so luckily, and that's the book is called The Last 6 Minutes, and the reason I call it The Last 6 Minutes was that Matthew's the majority of the assault happened at the Surrey Central SkyTrain station. And so the cameras that were facing that area in which this was happening captured the last 6 minutes of my son's life, essentially. And so luckily, because of those cameras and the quick thinking of the police officers that attended the site, they pulled the video surveillance. They were able to see the people on the camera, and they were actually I believe they were found that same night. They had gone to Surrey Memorial Hospital and were found and arrested. And since then, we're going on 19 years. So there's been a lot that has happened. So I've written 3 books to sort of go over the entire part. So the second book is called Cry for Justice. And this is about the second part of the trial, because we had a trial where both were convicted of murder. Then there was an appeal where one of the convicted went before the appellate courts, was then given a second trial. That's Cry for Justice. And then I'm not going to tell you the ending. And then Beyond the Crossroads, a journey from grief to grace, is basically a standalone. So this is a sequel, but this one is a standalone, because so many of the people that have followed me and read the first 2 books had actually been writing to me in the interim as I was trying to heal and grieve, asking me if I could, write a third book about how I got from a grieving mom to
Yeah.
this place of now advocating for victims of crime and still working. I don't advocate, and we're no longer with FACT now, but I still work in communities. My role in the Fraser Valley is one in which I do advocate for people, and but in a different capacity.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering like how, because obviously you don't get over it, you just move on, right?
Correct.
You learn how to move on. But how do you reconcile that in your head, the fact that this happened to your child?
I don't Nancy, I don't think it's something you ever do reconcile. I think it's something that you will live with for the rest of your life. And
Right.
that's something I try to really convey in this book. In fact, I actually posted today on my Facebook how you can live in grief, but still be so very grateful for all of the beautiful things that you still
I
have
saw
and are around you.
Yeah.
And I do believe that I'm at that place now, and it's not a place that one arrives to within a year or two. This has taken me 19 years of grieving and processing and going through the motions of what grief looked like for me, because grief is so different for everybody. And so there have been people who have said to me, Sandie, how did you get from there to here? You're doing so well. And really, I don't think I would have been able to cope had I not started that organization where I was able to advocate for others. I do a lot of community work, a lot of volunteer work that has helped me to heal in ways. So I'm always sort of out there telling people about how healing and therapeutic writing can be, journaling can be, how therapeutic helping others can be, right?
Yes.
It's incredible the void that darkness seems to start to be filled with light. And I mean, it's taken me years to sort of navigate my way through this journey from grief to grace, but it's been one that's been sort of a roller coaster because of all the different hearings that we get pulled. So you're constantly re-victimized, and we live through something called what I call the grief's calendar. So birthdays, holidays, all of those things sort of pull you back. So it's 10 steps forward, 4 steps back. And it's this dance really that we do as we're grieving that helps us reach a point where we can still live with the grief and just learn to find joy again.
Right, yeah, for sure. Now you have other children, I believe?
I do. So when Matthew was murdered, I was actually pregnant with my daughter, who's 18 today.
Oh, wow.
And she survived. I'm so grateful. And we also had, I was married previously, so Matthew had 2 younger brothers that were living at home with us as well. And they're in their mid-30s, late 20s now. So, and still not coping well with the loss of their brother.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, how is it for them? Because as a mom, it's a different thing than losing a sibling.
Yeah, so the boys were all 4 years apart and very, very close to each other. Mitchell at that time was 12, just going on 13, so a really pivotal time in his life. And then Braden was just 8 years old at the time. So David and I did everything that we could as parents to try and ensure that our kids were getting therapy, that we were doing all the things, including healing ourselves. But unfortunately, the boys as teens started using drugs and alcohol to mask the pain. And so still today are battling with addictions. And I speak very openly about my son's addictions and how I grieve the living, and what people don't understand is when your children are out there and they're struggling and you're trying so hard to pull them back into the light, you really do grieve them as well.
Oh, for sure. Just thinking about, like, I was 4 when one of my older brothers had drowned, and how even at 4, how traumatic. You're not sure what's all that's going on.
Yes.
But something not good happened, right?
Yes.
So that's hard. And we grew up in a time where, parents didn't talk about those things.
Correct.
Children didn't go for therapy. So it's good now that it's acceptable thing for children and parents alike to
Yes.
go for therapy, right?
Absolutely. And I do write a lot about that in my third book, that, you know, we can only do so much on our own. And if we don't have the
Yeah.
tools and resources that we need, it's a really great idea to reach out to somebody. And if you don't know how to reach someone, you know, please reach out to me and I'd be more than happy to help you navigate that.
Right. Now you said you've got letters from people, they contact you,
Yeah,
right?
so for years after the first two books, the second book actually won an award in 2010 for, I believe it says right here, but it's hard to read. So it won an award
It's hard to
for,
read.
yeah, true crime. It was basically like the Reader's Choice Award for 2010 for true crime books that were published that year.
Right?
And so I had this amazing following of you know, moms and dads and just even people that had never lost a child had reached out to me, you know, just sick about what had happened and how Matthew's life was taken from him. And they would write to me on, you know, they'd find me on Facebook or they'd find me on social media, or they would show up at a book signing at Chapters or Indigos. And I remember, you know, when I thought, okay, well, I'm going to publish this book and then what? You know, and then, you know, being booked into a Chapters to go to a book signing and seeing people arriving and seeing people lined up outside the door and around the parking lot. And I just couldn't process how this story had touched so many lives, because it was a very high profile story.
Right.
And so it was in the news all the time. So people would actually say to me, you know, come and hug me and say things like they knew me, like they,
Oh, yeah.
and then I had to realize, like, okay, well, they've read my story. So obviously I've given them a glimpse behind closed doors so they could name my children and my husband and all of those things. So it's just nice to connect with people who are perhaps have walked in my shoes, or perhaps one day will walk in my shoes, which I don't wish on anyone.
Yeah, for sure. So a lot of times when there's tragedy, couples have a difficult time. Sometimes they split up because they find it just too difficult, you know. How do you think you and your husband managed to pull through together?
Yeah, so we've seen that over the years, when we've met other families and come together, how it has shattered the entire family. I think for David and I, the most important factor was we were best friends.
Ah, right.
And we never, there was something I noted with other families where there always seemed to be some type of blaming of the other person for what happened. I realized that there was nothing that David and I could have done to have changed the sequence of events that took place that night. Our son wanted to go watch the fireworks. He was a responsible young 16-year-old. We thought nothing of it. It just was, you know, what he wanted to do. And I was pregnant at the time with our daughter Chaya and was feeling really sick. So I said to him, you go ahead, honey, I'll order you guys pizza. So we ordered pizza for the boys and off he went. And, you know, we didn't realize that that would be the last time. But, you know, going back to your question about, you know, how have we managed to stay together? I think the fact that regardless of where I was in my grieving process, David never left my side. And I think in that, you know, when I think back to those days where I could scarcely get out of bed, even have a shower, wash my hair, he was always there. And I was never left feeling alone. And so I think if you have a partner that is that person for you, that safe place for you to cry, he never told me to get over it. He never told me not to talk about Matthew or what was happening. And those were things that other women had said to me, that their partners were like taking their child's photos down. They didn't want photos of memories in the house. They didn't want to talk about it. They wanted to almost pretend as though that child no longer existed. And I couldn't do that. Still to this day, Matthew's photos are all over our home. In fact, David and I have adopted our biological grandson, who we raise as our son. We've had him since birth. And he's named after Matthew. His name is Matthew as well, but we call him Maddie. And he'll walk up to, you know, Matthew's pictures, and I watch him looking at all the details in his uncle's features and, you know, comparing and whatnot. And I do see so much of Matthew and Maddie. So I just feel doubly blessed for sure.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's wonderful, you know, right? Now that's another thing when people tell others to get over it. It's a horrible thing.
Yeah.
to say to anybody.
Yeah.
You know, after my husband passed away, I remember going to see my doctor. My blood pressure was just wacky because it hit me after like 6 months afterwards, right?
Yes.
And he wanted to put me on antidepressants. You should not be depressed. It's 6 months. You know,
Yeah.
it was only 6 months, right? And well, of course, I took the prescription. I just didn't fill it.
Good.
But it was just that's from a medical professional, you know. So I don't understand anybody with that thinking that anybody needs to get over anything. It's if you're gonna, are you gonna, whether you do or not, it's your
journey.
your journey, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. You know, something I've learned, and it happens often with medical practitioners or providers that we may go and see. In fact, I write about it in my first book when I reached out for help and went to see very early on, like maybe a week and a half after Matthew was murdered. I just couldn't, there was so much of the details that the officers couldn't tell us. So your
Right,
brain
right.
starts to try and piece things together, and it can be quite scary. And so I did reach out, and I remember sitting across from this lovely woman, and I'm sure she's very good at what she does. And as I was, I mean, I was heaving, I was purging, I was in so much pain and trying to understand it all. And all of a sudden, I stopped to, I don't know, maybe grab some tissue, and I hear that she's crying. And immediately I was just like, what? Why is she crying? And because I am that person, a very maternal person, somebody who's very wanting to fix and help others,
Right, yeah.
or empathic, I guess, I instantly shut down. So I shut down my emotions because I felt as though I was putting her in a place of feeling uncomfortable or feeling awkward. And she, as soon as I looked up and saw this, she was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry. I'm feeling so much pain for you." But it was in that moment, not that she said anything wrong. I just was, it tuned it right out for me. So I think it's really important that we find providers that are a safe space for us, right? So, you know, my initial thoughts when you tell me that your physician said this to you is, you know, I always in my mind think to say, you know, what if it was your child?
Yes.
Could you say that?
Yeah.
Would you want, you know, so always, you know, putting yourself in someone else's shoes and asking yourselves, you know, would I say that? Would, you know,
Yeah.
so I think that's really important. Just always walking a mile in someone else's shoes and just remembering that everybody has a story. And mine is not any more valid or, you know, terrible as someone else's. So I really always try to come from a place of understanding and empathy and compassion. And I think that's why I've done so well too. I've really been able to regulate, you know, especially in the first few years, my thought process, and the journaling was really important for me. And it's something I've started doing again. And that's how the third book actually came to be. Because in 2018, just as I was feeling like I was in a place that I was going to return to work, Chaya was going to school. I was in a terrible, terrible motor vehicle accident as a pedestrian on a city bus in Vancouver.
Oh, wow.
And when I fell, because I went from a walking to a falling, I hit my head quite badly and did some damage in my shoulder, which I'm still dealing with. But what that did was I had a concussion, which then became post-concussion syndrome, and now it's a small brain injury. And so what that did was it sort of exacerbated my emotions, brought lots of stuff that I had dealt with back to the surface, as well as just emotional regulation. So incapable of just regulating my emotions. So I've worked really, really hard over the past, oh my gosh, almost 6 years since that accident to be at a place where I'm at. So the fact that I was able, with the help of my husband, put a third book together, taking, you know, notes and journals and ideas that I had, it was incredible just to sit in front of a keyboard, which I hadn't done in years. And it literally just poured out of me. And it was incredible to watch this book come to fruition.
So where can people buy your books?
So you can either find them on Amazon. You can just punch in my name, Sandra Martins Toner, or I think the easiest way is just heading over to my webpage, sandramartinstoner.com.
Okay.
All one word, all lowercase, and on there we'll have all of the links to the books.
Okay, great. Well, I think we're just about out of time. I hope we covered everything, but I just want to thank you very much for being here and doing this with me. And we met in a way of that giving thing, you know,
Yes,
which is kind of fun. So anyway, let me just to the audience there, I want to thank you very much for listening, for tuning in, and you've been listening to Sandie Martins Toner. And yeah, check her out. Check out her site, which I'll include the name, the story about that, peeps.
Yes.
I don't do editing, so you get what you get. Anyway, thank you very much for watching this show. I hope you continue to do so. Take care, everyone, and peace out. Sorry, they've changed everything here. Not my fault. It's Zoom.